can you just tell me like who you are, who Pachamama is, and just a little bit about like your background, Kiera lineage?
Yes, definitely. So my name is Andrés Yael Villarradillo. I am right now, this moment, I'm 41 years old. I'm a father of two, and I have a third one with my partner. And, I've been on the spiritual path since 2013, although we all have been. This life is a spiritual path, right? The whole life. And so my conscious path into spirituality was when my son was born in 2013. And I experienced, a lot of fear because before the spiritual path, I was not a happy person. I was not a good person either. I was with a lot of chaos. I had a lot of, negative traits. I was, on the low end of consciousness speaking. And, when he was born, I was able to appreciate this purity for the first time in my life. And I couldn't believe that I had the privilege of taking care of such tender purity and fragility. And I was able to see such purity that, something shook very deeply within me. And I was very deeply afraid, fearful, because, I knew that I didn't have it in me to be a good father. And I didn't experience what a good father was when I was growing up. At least I was, heavily traumatized because of it. And so we are, I was coming into the stage where I was experiencing, a complete overwhelmment for being able to take care of that life. And so I came out of the delivery room, and my mom and my dad, who haven't seen each other in 20 years at that point, I was, coming to them, and they're together for the first time, and I'm coming crying, like in deep fear, and they're like scared, like, is everything okay? What happened? And I'm just like started like bawling and crying, like this pain and fear, because I recognized that I wasn't ready, emotionally speaking. I was not mature. I had a lot of shadow, a lot of demons, and negative traits, negative patterns. And so they recognized it, right? Because they had me when they were 18 years old, both of them. And so, they could feel that same pain because they experienced it when they were young. And we hugged, and there was like, it's okay, this is life kind of feeling, right? But I personally had this prayer in my heart where I was like crying to the heavens, which I didn't know if there was a God that existed. And I was just like, please, if there is something right now, I need some help right now. I would like you to show yourself to me, and please provide me with some assistance. That was like my prayer for a couple of nights when we were still in the hospital and back then. And so I quit my job at the car dealership, and I dedicated to my son. But then I went into this process of unintentional fasting. I was reading some very powerful material that opened up my eyes, and I had like this awakening experience, very, very profound, very deep experience that marked the beginning of something new. And, it was a lot of energy, entities, beings, and, I'm glad that I didn't go to I had this unknowing, this faith that it was real, what I was experiencing was real. So I never thought of going to like a psychiatrist, but I would have been heavily medicated and probably diagnosed as schizophrenic or something, because it was out of this world, the type of experience that I was having. And it lasted for like about a good 6 months that I was in this space. And then from there, I started to come down again to my old self after all of these effects of the awakening process started to fade out. And when I come to myself, I recognize that there's this inherent, very, very deep, profound work that I have to do with myself. And what this started to look like is, I have to work on my shadow work. I have to do the shadow work, working on envy, working on, greed, and all of the egoic patterns that where I didn't care about any of my environment. I just care about me and maybe my loved ones, but at the expense of anything, right? So it wasn't really harmonious. So I started the path, and this is where I came to Mother Ayahuasca. This is where the first time that I had Mother Ayahuasca was shortly after this awakening period. I had the blessing of having good teachers, at the beginning of the path. Really, really beautiful teachers are still considered loved ones, loved friends. And so I went to the spiritual work with Mother Ayahuasca, and I went with some pseudo shamans here and there, which were instrumental, for those first experiences. Very grateful. But there was like something that I didn't really truly resonate with them, because I felt like there was way more shadow in them than in me. So it's like, how am I gonna learn from this lady or from this guy I'm having like a shamanic experience with like all of these conjectures and dumb rules of like, you have to wear white because of blah blah blah, or like you have to do this, and it's like, I know that they're just repeating what they know, right? It doesn't really resonate deeply. And so I started just going to like an incubation period with myself, doing a lot of Advaita Vedanta, a lot of Hindu practices and wisdom, and I was certifying myself, like teacher of this, teacher of that. But, the main work that I was doing was going within to cleanse the closet, the basement, so to speak. And, when I was doing this type of work, I found that I didn't have the resources, right, to be able to navigate through that. And I went through 3 years of like blind, just like throwing darts to every wall, that there was no walls in the basement, because it's so black, and you cannot not even see if anything's sticking, because it's so, the shadow, you don't understand if anything is being resolved. And it really wasn't, because there was no point in my life where I felt like there was any growth at those. But what I felt though was there was like an incubation process where I was creating a space of me feeling okay with going really deep into the shadow. And so going.
Chair for a second.
Yeah.
Sit down with you.
Yeah, brother. Yeah, when you say you're gonna stand, I'm like, go for it.
I didn't think you're grabbing the chair.
And so I'm going very, very deep into profound, heroic doses with friends and other teachers, but just on our own, right? Not to follow a doctrine, just like going very deep within ourselves. I started brewing the medicine and learning from different ayahuasqueros and paleros. And so I got to get very familiar and intimate with Mother Ayahuasca, but most medicines also. I had some toads that I was caring for. I had nice big sanctuary for them, growing San Pedro cactuses, growing peyote, growing mushrooms. I had like a mushroom farm in Santa Maria. And so all of the medicines, were very resonant to me. But it was the depth of the space that I could get into, my own space that I could get into, that was always the mysticism, that was calling me. And so then I went very deep into a lot of different ones, right? Separate times. And, it got to the point where I feel like after a couple of years, like 2.5, 3 years of working with the medicines, I'm like, this is not moving anywhere. I'm still angry. I'm still very triggered by different things. I'm still, working through, shadow, and I feel still on the back of the head, that back of my head, I felt the voice of my dad saying, you should do this, or you must not do that, or like this and this, right? I felt like heavily dependent on my mom for approval. There's all sorts of things that are still happening, and I'm like, I didn't see any resolution from that. Even though I was going very deep into Mother Ayahuasca, ayahuasca for 8 hours, and then the next morning again, another 6-8 hours, heroic doses again and again for, a few years. And when I got to this point of like not being able to resolve any of it, then a prayer arose. There was a prayer that came up that was a prayer to Mother Ayahuasca and a prayer to the divine, where I asked, I need some help, I need some assistance. And that's the proof that it's always listening. The divine is always listening to you, is in that the teacher came. So this was my teacher, Shaba, and it was at the very beginning of the path. And he's a great man. To this day, I have a lot of love and respect for him. And he introduced me, he was instrumental for me to begin to know and open up this new chapter of my life, which was Andean cosmology. And this is where I started to understand the need for lineage, the need for a path, a Kapachñan path that supports you. The Kapachñan is the spiritual path of the Andes. And depending on the lineage, if you're going into the Quero lineage, it's the Kapachñan. If you're going into the Huáscar lineages, it's called Canchis Patañan. But it is a spiritual path of righteousness, right? Understanding different levels of consciousness that you have access to and that you are working, and this methodology to understand the different steps. It starts with 0, it starts where you're asleep, and then you go into the Pacha level, which is the awakening, the radical responsibility. And so we get into the lineages, and I started working with him, and he introduced me to the teachers from the Andes, and these are the Paucar lineage. And, got initiated later on into higher levels of consciousness within that same Kapachñan. And it's been since 2018, working with all of these lineages and getting initiated in rites of passage for achieving the Runa consciousness, the Hampeg, Pampa Misayok, Varayok, Alto Misayok, knowing how to work with the Misa, knowing how to command energy, knowing how to help someone go very deep into their consciousness so that they can have an awakening process, or how to take someone out of shadow. And all of these obviously are parts of natural organic skills that begin to arise within you as you go into your own shadow work.
Yeah, that's what I want to focus on a little bit, because the thing that I think is really interesting about you is the education with the Hindu philosophy, and then also the Quero lineage and all the Andean stuff. And from what I've been learning from you, I like the Hinduism stuff a lot, because it explains to me like how to let go of attachment, how to live more harmoniously and with acceptance. But then the Andean cosmology teaches me a lot about what actually. So it's more like, for me, the Hindu teaches me how I should live, and the Andean cosmology teaches me about what I've understanding how to reconcile the mistakes I've made and how I think, and understanding how the brain works. I think there's a lot of overlap between the Andean cosmology and the psychology. Very complementary.
So the way that I experience it and the way that we teach it in the organization is, one is a clear path pointing the way, right? So as you have like your highway in front of you, you're going from San Francisco to, LA, and you have a couple of different routes, but it's usually either Highway 5 or Highway 101, Highway 1 through the coast. And you have the path ahead to get to the same destination. However, the vehicle, right? You're gonna need your car to be well tuned, right? You're gonna have to have good tires. You're gonna need to be, your spark plugs, unless you're driving a Tesla or something. But you get the point. It's like you have to be well prepared for that journey, and the preparation is all of the unconscious, subconscious aspects within you. And this is where Andean cosmology comes in, because it's a very pragmatic and grounded approach to spirituality and to the spiritual path, which is that highway road that you want to take, right? There's a million things that can happen in that. Whether they're happening to you directly or indirectly, you're going to experience a lot of different things. Stop, turns, maybe someone cutting you off in the middle of the road. Things like that. It's obviously metaphors, but the Kapachñan, the Andean cosmology, what it prepares you to do is to take a look at that subconscious aspect that ensures that you're going to be able to be present while you're driving. And you can be present, appreciating what is taking place. And you're going to be able to receive the proper inspiration, be able to understand it for what it is, question your own filtering methods, your filtering mechanisms. How do you interpret the inspirations to make sure that, you are not, living off conjecture, right? You're not misinterpreting that inspiration. And so, when you take a look at the wisdom of Advaita Vedanta, where it says, and one of the highest points of it is like, you are not the doer, right? And it speaks about consciousness in a lot of different ways, about just dissolve and let things happen, let it be. And all of this, it is obviously the end result of someone that is enlightened. But to work your ego into a healthy state of true surrender, where you're consciously okay with surrendering and being in alignment at all levels, conscious, unconscious, subconscious. And the unconscious part is clearing itself out as you work this, but you're going to be feeling from your core that surrender is what's calling you. Surrender to the present moment. And it's a journey, right? We're working the knowing through your experience. This is what the ego forms its protection mechanisms through. All of your experiences that you've had that tells you that, even though that that the person feels like it doesn't resonate, you still want to trust. You still want to look in their eyes, that spark of divinity that we all have, and look at them in the eye, while knowing that potentially they can come and take your resources or things like this, of course, right? So it is navigating those fine lines in between, understanding that life has a chaos that it's consistently resolving itself while you're staying true to your nature. And so it is the paradox of being and not being, of everything and nothing. There's a lot of different aspects that you get to reconcile in putting the wisdom into perspective, and from the bottom up, starting to work and to walk that path that takes you into that inevitable surrender.
I want to kind of bridge this to trauma, because I think the whole thing that inspired me to share this stuff and learn more about it is, as a firefighter, I wasn't taught what the symptoms of trauma would be. The only thing I knew about PTSD was like the movie Brothers, if you've ever seen that, and it's an extreme portrayal of PTSD, and I think a lot of the times it's more subversive and more subtle and comes out years later in other ways, especially for first responders that are having kind of like these constant micro traumas, and it's not like something unexpected. We signed up for it, and we know we're going to go see people die, and we know we're going to see bad things. So it happens slowly, and like for me, I always thought like, oh, I'm fine, this stuff doesn't affect me. And I think that's a lot of first responders just lack education of what the real, like how this is actually affecting them. So like in ceremonies with participants and stuff, what have you seen as like common ways that trauma manifests, or just with what you know about psychology and Andean cosmology?
Definitely. No, it manifests in many different ways. It's not just one way. It depends on the depth of trauma. It depends if it's simple trauma or complex trauma. Meaning like if it depends if it's been a reinforced experience of trauma again and again and again and again, then the roots of that go very deep, right? And it is reinforced by life, so then the mind can be completely, mind and emotions both can be completely bought into the idea that life is suffering and victimhood and all of these things. And so it really does depend on the way that it manifests. Inside of medicine, trauma can manifest as literal psychotic breaks or exorcism. It's temporary, but it can manifest into many chaotic ways where people, depending on what type of trauma it is, if it's sexual trauma, it's very disassociating. If it's sexual trauma from mom or dad, it's very, very, very ingrained into who we are, because we're a reflection of mom and dad, right? So it can be very disassociating, to have those type of trauma. If it's a trauma where it's, you're fearing for your life because, you get like first or second or third degree burns, right? Then there's a trauma that gets associated in between work and safety, right? And so it can create a lot of conflict as to like, there's like a deep rejection to wanting to do the work that we're being called to do, right? If you're a first responder, firefighter, or an EMT, it doesn't matter. When you're exposed to all of the chaos, which is so raw, right? Seeing someone die and someone dies in your arms, that right there creates an imprint, because there is an aspect of us that understands that life is finite. And there's another part of us that you can introspect and say like, well, no, life continues, but what I'm experiencing and feeling right now is that my brother, that I've known for 5-10 years, just lost his life. And that's very painful, to lose a loved one like that. And then it puts things into perspective for you, it's like, I don't know if I want to do this. And so the ego starts working, right? And the working is a defense mechanism, is a protection mechanism. Because first and foremost, you want to protect from that, which is a reality for the type of work, but at the same time, you don't want to experience that, right? So then it creates this, discombobulated type of feeling where you don't know if you want to keep on going or not, and you lose that sense of purpose. But it can happen with anything, right? It can happen when people go bankrupt, or when a marriage ends, or any heavy experience that you go through. It creates a feeling of like, the pain is not what I was planning for. And because that's not what I wanted, then I want to, exempt myself from going again into those paths. And it can be very, very difficult to overcome. And again, it depends how difficult it is. It depends on how deep the pain goes.
That is a good bridge into something we were talking about a few weeks ago after the Palisades fires, when all those people's homes burned down. Egoic trauma versus perceptual trauma. And I think the perceptual trauma applies a lot to somebody, a first responder that's responding to these calls. It's not our houses burning down, it's not our loved ones being lost, it's witnessing. And there's specific ways that you were saying this perceptual trauma manifests, and for me it was a lot of changing my view of the world, because now my view of the world is based on the things I see, and it looks there's a disconnect between reality and what I'm seeing of reality. And then the other thing I wanted to touch on is how that's stored in the body, because that's something that we were kind of taught, like trauma's stored in the body, but nobody really understands what that means. I didn't understand it until medicine showed me where literally it's stored in the body. So I wanted to talk about how resolving that trauma, we were having that conversation this morning, resolving versus, I guess, acknowledging it, because all we really know about mental health as firefighters where I work is, if you have a problem, go to therapy and tell a therapist about it. That's talking about it, but it's not always resolving it. So I just wanted to talk about the body resolving it and like perceptual trauma.
Yes, and so, a lot of the times is more than trauma, it can be a lot of storytelling, right? The mind has a tendency, this is, Hindu cosmology, Hinduism, wisdom also. The mind has a tendency to gravitate towards the negative, right? There's a whole example of like something good happens to you, maybe tell someone, but if something bad happens, you tell 10 people. Bad experience with a waiter or whatever, right? The mind tends to gravitate towards the negative. And so that's the nature of the mind. And so a lot of times it doesn't have to be something so traumatic. We have a tendency as a human race, as a human collective species, we have a tendency to dramatize. And it is reinforced by, all Hollywood movies and things like that. You need like some big struggle to overcome it, and like, good things are, you need to sweat blood and like tears and like the whole thing so that you can really taste it. Look at all of those movies, inspirational movies, right? You have to go through hardship. And so the mind is wired to go through that, and then you start to understand that a lot of the times is not so deeply ingrained type of complex trauma, and it's more of like the dramatizing of it. The drama that we create through all of the stories of how horrible it is, and it just comes from attachment, and again, that tendency to gravitate towards the negative. So it really does depend, right? If it's something superficial that we're just attached to, I had a teacher that said, like, you want to suffer because you're addicted to suffering. This is not something that you hear very often, but you're angry because you want to be angry. It's like, no, I don't want to be angry. I was like, you're depressed because you want to be depressed. It's like, no, I'm taking sertraline. I don't want to be depressed. I'm taking Zoloft. I don't want to be depressed. But there is something within the person's psyche, the person's emotional patterns, that being depressed is a safe space. Right? Being angry is a safe space. We had a Hampek that she just loved to be angry the whole time. And it's like, well, why? It's because it was through anger that I survived a lot of violence in my childhood. So we make it purposeful a lot of the times, right? It doesn't mean that it's right, but it is normalized. Right? So to continue to suffer becomes normalized for a lot of people. But when you're talking about deeply ingrained experiential trauma, where you create what in Hinduism is called a samskara, which is an imprint, an energetic imprint. We always tell this story that you're driving, imagine you're driving on 101, and all of a sudden you're minding your own business, and a red semi-truck just like merges to the left. You're in his or her blind spot, and then you're like squashed against the contention wall. And when that happens, you go under the whole thing, maybe some accident, like rolling around. It's very traumatic. You feel the glass, shatter and maybe like hits you, smoke, and it's like, emergency and, paramedics, the whole thing, right? You have concussions and you name it. So all of that, it is an experience that creates trauma. And there is a lot of elements in that your subconscious is picking up. And some of it is going to be a red semi-truck. So 3 years after you healed and you work through the concussions, the whole thing, you're driving, it doesn't even have to be a red one. If it's a red one, it's immediate, just like, your whole body's going to go into like protectiveness, trying to brace for that, right? It's expecting it, again. But it's all of that reactionary measures that we take because of the trauma. It's because in the moment there was a few components. There was an emotionality, and the emotion of someone crashing is like panic, is fear, because in the moment it's like, it's like I'm gonna die. It feels like that's what the ego starts to understand. So fear, emotion, and emotion is another way of saying energy. So there's energy in an event. It means something. That emotion, that event that is taking place, it means that you could lose your life, for example. Right? So it's got symbolism. It represents that a semi-truck is driving right next to you, then there's a meaning attached to the experience, and now all semi-trucks have the potential of killing you.
This is what Bissell van der Kolk, the author of Body Keeps the Score, talks about, is trauma memory being fragmented and different than a memory of a non-traumatic event. Like the things that stick are certain details like smells and emotions and sounds, but
senses,
all that
all
sensory
senses,
stuff
yes.
sticks, and because that's a nervous system experience. And then later when we have other experiences, it doesn't even have to be like a driving experience. Like
it could be triggered by a lot of different things. Yes.
Yeah, it could be anything.
Yes.
And that's why it's hard to put two and two together, because it could be a completely unrelated garage project that brings up the same nervous system reaction. Mm-hmm. And then it's also hard to remember after a trauma-specific like details, specific events. That's why you have 5 different stories from 5 different witnesses.
Yes. Yeah, and when you're telling the story, you're telling also from the perception of 5 different ways, 5 different senses as well. So addressing the memory has to include, so we do regression, for locking down the specifics of a traumatic event. Then we need to go and recount what did you experience, and it's a few times, right, that you go. Regression therapy is amazing. This is why medicine, sacred medicines are so powerful in the healing of it, because you get to go again and remember, relive, and resolve. Remember the whole event, relive it, and relive it as much as you can, right? Like, allow yourself, through courage and a little bit of guidance, at the beginning stages of these processes, you need someone to help you through it. And you go through a reliving of the processes, and then you resolve it. How do you resolve it? You resolve it by understanding why it happened, what's the purpose, what's the lesson, right? What did you need to learn? What did you need to learn? And then also to make it functional, meaning like create some value for the experience such that it is actually providing some value for your life and others, right? If only by the mere understanding of like, okay, I'm gonna go in between 2 trailers, but just want to be a little bit more present, right? More aware in the present moment, and it's serving a value for you. And why?
Wait for that bell to stop.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
Might be a few minutes.
Oh, okay.
It's fine.
Yeah, it's nice for getting out of the victim mentality too, and like that's like the next thing that I think is coming, like in this conversation, a good bridge is like why this medicine helps. And we were talking about like how the brain's wired before and how we can rewire it. Like I think of the fresh coat of snow analogy, where there's paths in the snow and these are these thought patterns that we're stuck in.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just the easiest path to walk when there's a foot of snow on the ground and there's already a path that's packed down. But once you get that fresh coat of snow, now you can have new thought patterns.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, in kind of like your words, how does that work?
And so when you're saying how does that work, you're referring to as to how to lay new tracks?
Yeah, like how do we, I guess the medicine's good for giving us freedom to come up with these new thought patterns and reframe these things, come up with new stories behind things, and to transmute this victim mentality into like meaning, coming up with, like you were saying, find the purpose.
It's a little bit deeper. Lesson. It's a little bit deeper than just reframing. It's realizing when you're very connected to yourself, it's not just like, okay, let me try to ponder a new way of understanding what my life was, because that feels like, very conceptual, very mental, and it doesn't, a lot of the times doing that does not necessarily reach the depths of the soul. And so what it is going to a soul-searching space. It helps to be in an altered state of consciousness to get the big picture of what is the purpose of me going into this accident? What is the purpose of me going into divorce, going into bankruptcy, losing a loved one? What is the purpose of all of this pain that I'm going through? Right? If I'm not going to go into victimhood and I'm not going to go into suffering, then the pain is creating an awareness. Pain is inevitable. And we've heard this, right? It's suffering is optional. But then what is the purpose of pain? And the purpose of pain a lot of the times is to awaken consciousness. Is it the only way? No, it's not. But as a means to learn to wake up when we are fully asleep as a race, as a species, pain has been very instrumental, right? Look at all of the history events that have created a lot of pain in life. And so when you take a look at wars, when you take a look at famine, destruction of any kind, things that have been very, very painful for people, great fires like what you experienced, all of those things create an awareness of there's something that I'm missing here, right? There's more to just all of this physicality. And so the pain, it's opening up an awareness of a depth of ourselves. So keeping that in mind, then we start to take a look at everything that takes place that feels like discomfort, trauma, that feels very painful, very frightening. And then we put it into that big picture as to what is the purpose of this experience. When you start to look at things in life as to what is the purpose of this specific experience in my life or in life in general, then you start to tune into a higher perspective that does not require conflict within the experience itself. Then you start to take a look at things, you know, the dog that you see, the stray dog that you see in the street, in an alley, missing a leg and super skinny. You can feel compassion, but doesn't necessarily prompt a suffering within you that makes you put away your plans in your life so that you can go and save that one dog, right? And the same goes for people and the whole thing, right? You can experience a connectedness without a surrendering of your presence and the surrendering of your life. And these are what the teachings show, you know, the Soham teachings, the No Kankani teachings. It's understanding that you're part of it, right? But you're not responsible for anything except your life and your centeredness.
That sounds a lot like what I've heard. Anthony DeMello says this, and there's a couple other different philosophies that say the same thing in different ways, but the first step is becoming aware of the negative feelings, because a lot of people just kind of live asleep and aren't aware of how they're behaving, how they're affecting other people, how they're not happy and could be happier. And step two is realize that that negative feeling is within you. It's not anybody else's, nobody else. And that's where I think medicine really came in for me, is that nobody else or nothing else caused that negative feeling. Like, nobody physically gave me a negative feeling. I gave myself that in response to something.
Unconsciously, you know, unintentionally.
Right. And then the third step would be not identifying with that and realizing that, I guess, the separation between the self and the ego, not identifying with that negative feeling. Like, I am not depressed, I'm feeling depression. And then just anytime something comes up, repeating those steps to awareness.
And so the human being is the goal here. The human being is you in this human shape and form, but in full presence. And if that's the case, then all of the components, ego and spirit, must be integrated. And so what this looks like is your I, whenever you say I like this or I don't like that, even when you say I am, which is more of the embodied consciousness within you, all of that is still from the I. Individually, you're expressing all of this awareness and consciousness. So it is not so much about the separation of the ego and spirit, is the understanding of both aspects. The understanding of who am I when I'm living from the ego? What triggers me? What I don't like? What are my comfort zones? What limits me, you know, in my expansiveness, in this journey of expansion? And then understanding what is spirit also. Not to put one above the other, because they're both required for this embodiment. Right? I am that I am. It is an identification with the whole. Right? A lot of people is like, no, I detach from all identification, the whole thing. It's a way. Right? This is, again, what we were talking about earlier is the paradox of everything or nothing. Right? The Buddhist is like nothing, and the Hindu say like everything. You know, which one's right? They're both right. Reconciling those of both of those is not being, you know, attached to either or of those, which means that the ego can exist amidst the experience of divinity as well.
So what is the ego in your words, and how does that contribute to
the ego?
How we embody the things that we see?
The ego is the guardian of your individuality. And it is programmed subconsciously through your personal experiences, and more than anything, your formative years, 0 to 11, sometimes goes to 13. It varies in between person to person. But all of those base experiences that you had, those core values that determine how you feel about yourself, how you feel about others, in which way you perceive yourself your worth, your value, your capacities, and then how you perceive others. All of that is, the structure of the ego. It's a grid. And you can see it inside of an experience of ayahuasca. And you can communicate to that also as something that you can have access to it, to reprogram, to shape it, to heal it. A lot of the times it has very negative beliefs about how life is. And when you start to recognize those, it is your responsibility to heal it. You start to become self-resourced to heal yourself. The ego, it is a good thing. It is a gift from the divine. Right? And it is our job, our duty, to make sure that this aspect of the ego can flow also. There are some lineages of consciousness that say that the ego should expand and go into what it's called the ego sum. And the ego sum is when you are the you, right? The isness, the I, it is expanded enough, sort of like in a Bufo experience, where you're expanded with the whole and you're merged consciously with everything that is, with no resistance and flow, in harmony. A personal harmony, regardless if there's chaos or not. Because if there's chaos, you understand that there's going to be order from it, right? So your level of understanding raises to a higher degree of understanding, and that's a potential for the ego also. Right? So that you can recognize the paradox is like being everything and nothing once you continue to the next dimension, for example. When you're going into the fourth or the fifth dimension, where you are individual and yet you are absolutely everything. And you become a conscious part of the mesh, this river of love that it is the fifth dimension and above. So it's very helpful for us to work on the aspects of the ego that are contracted. Trauma is contracted. There's, people nowadays are starting to say how, negative energies, dense energies, they call them demons, of course, right? But it is just fear begets more fear. The action of fear is to make more of itself. The same way that a plant is wired and programmed to grow, right? Negative, as long as there is life in it, it doesn't matter if it's a negative aspect of life, it is meant to grow also. Right? But you get to decide within you what parts of you are growing and what parts of you are, for the purpose of more harmony, extinguishing its life. We have a saying in the Andes that says, kill what kills you. Right? If you know that you have a parasite, you're stealing your life, and at the same time injecting some venom, and toxicity, then it is your responsibility to, address that and kill that, right, out of your electromagnetic field, etc., etc. So going back to the ego is the guardian of your individuality. Without the ego, you wouldn't be alive. In people that say like, I'm going to kill my ego, you're going to kill yourself. You cannot exist without an ego. The purpose of experiencing this life in all of its magnitude, splendor, is to be the God-man, the I am consciousness, the human being, right? And so the ego is an amazing tool that allows us to experience you as Mike with all of the unique traits that you've experienced yourself to be, and me separate from you with all of those, and understand that there's divinity in both, right? To be able to complement and appreciate, and is the beginning stages of the evolution of consciousness into something greater. Yeah.
So, why do you think so many people are afraid of ayahuasca? Is it fear of going within, or is it just the myths around the vomiting and people think
it could be, think about it as comfort zones that do not serve the expansion. In a retreat a short while back, we had this participant, and she was saying that she felt afraid of the expansion, and she quoted Marianne Williamson saying like the thing that we're the most afraid is not our shadow, because the shadow is dense and the physical body is already dense. It's easy to navigate shadow, and when you start to truly touch upon the heights, the expansiveness where the body's not going to fit anymore, it's very disconcerting to the ego. We're used to a level of vibration. There's like status quo, right, of a baseline of emotion and thought. And all of that, when you're not consistent to that, you start to break the mold, it's frightening to the ego. You're going outside of your comfort zones. In which ways? Well, I don't like to purge. It feels like I don't, it's like the ego. And when I don't like, it's like the ego. My ego doesn't like. It's you, right? I don't want to experience the ego of death. It's attachment to life. And more than anything is, there's, Osho explains it very beautifully. There's like the fear of death is one of the most powerful fears. There's another one of fear of losing your mind. And so it's really just we're afraid of ourselves. We're afraid of what's in the closet, but more than that, right, what we see people resist to is people being afraid to the power that you can actually reconcile and become aware that you have. And it is something very difficult to navigate when you are attached to the little things that made you feel like this is the way that I have to take a look at life. You start to come out of that shell and experience a little bit more harmony within you, within your thoughts and emotions, more safe within your own vulnerability. You start to heal your masculine and your feminine. Then one of the things that starts to happen is like, it's okay, let me go there. Let me understand what I don't understand from within myself. Let me find out what is it that I need to work upon. And then you start to be responsible, you start to take responsibility. People are afraid of ayahuasca because by scientific paradigm, a lot of the times, science is not supporting, that type of healing yet. At least not in a mainstream type of way. You're not going to find a psychologist or a psychiatrist telling you, yes, go drink ayahuasca. Some do. But for the most part, it's not, right? It's not yet. And so people are very submitted to the scientific paradigm. And so if the doctor doesn't say it, like I have relatives that we've invited to this, and it's like, oh, it's like, Cambo, you're going to burn your skin. And like they start to, it's like, this is craziness, And we do respect that they feel in such a way. It's fine, not everybody will have their time. That's for sure. Whether it is in this life or the next one. Everybody will come to that point, of awakening. And so why they're afraid, it's always a personal reason. It could be the way that their mom is speaking about drugs, and this is a drug, for example. Misinterpretations, people thinking that, hallucinations is just tripping, right? Rather than understanding there's a value of the visions and everything else. So it could be many different reasons why. But what it boils down is fear. It's fear of the unknown. And the only thing that people don't truly know is themselves. It's fear of knowing themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, it's because the medicines, ayahuasca, especially psilocybin mushrooms, really bring back a lot of memories and a lot of deep stuff. I've heard a lot of stories about people. One guy I was talking to the other day just had a therapeutic psilocybin session like 2 weekends ago, and something from his childhood came up when he was doing it because of a death in the family that he was trying to kind of understand, trying to get through some grief. But things in his childhood came up that he didn't even think about for 40 years. So it's interesting how... Have you ever heard of like Egoic systems? It's something Stanislav Grof talked about. He talks about...
not super well versed. I heard the term.
It's... how memories are layered and attached. It's not like a filing cabinet in our brain
Sure.
where memories are stored year and month in chronological order. They're stored by connecting emotions. So we have
Yes.
this emotion from this call we went on that maybe that's all we know. This call is kind of bringing up a feeling.
Yes.
But underneath of that, there's another memory, childhood memory, that brought up the same feeling.
Yes.
Underneath of that, and at the center, there's sometimes a core memory that that these behavior patterns built on over like many years. So
Yes.
I think that takes a lot of courage to confront.
Yes, 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 because it's like you're going blind. You know, you don't know the map yet. And this is what I was talking about earlier, where we were talking about how it depends, the imprint that gets formed at the time of a trauma, right? There's different levels of pain, right? It could be something that it's like, I lost my mom, right? And now I'm abandoned. Now I don't have anybody to love me. Now, and that could be like so shattering to the ego, especially if you're young, that you will carry that. And then after the formative years are done, then that's what you have to project to the screen of the cosmos. And the cosmos is like, okay, this is the way that you signed up to learn from. And then here's a loved one that is going to abandon you. Here's another loved one that is going to betray you. Here's another loved one that is going to reject you, right? All to recreate that same feeling of losing love, which is what mom represents, losing love so that I can resolve it. So in reality, we're creating a lot of the chaos that we're creating is because we need to resolve what's inside. And so how it's going to manifest, how quick, the timelines in which it will manifest, how long is it going to take for that emotion to gestate in this new, partnership that I have, it depends on how deeply ingrained the pain is, the trauma is, and the misinterpretation of that pain, which is what causes the trauma. And so it's if you've experienced that and then you went to live with your aunt and then your aunt got tired of you or something, or she married and then she passed you to grandma, and then you get to 18 years old, now you're living on your own, but you get the first girlfriend and then it's 2 years and it's like she's out, and then again and again, and so you're repeating that pattern of like finding love and then love leaves you, and then finding it again and then love leaves you. And so whether it is in whichever way, it's like getting it and having it and then not having it, having have-nots, right? And so it could be in a lot of different ways. The way that it will manifest depends on many factors. One of the things that you said is it's that, right? So how deep the samskara is imprinted. How deep? If it's superficial pain, where it's like a cousin, not my mom, a cousin passed away and I loved her, but not my mom. My mom's still with me until this day and until I'm 40, 41 years old. Then, there's a stability that forms for you, right? And other kinds of love might be feeble, right? Might be very fragile, but the certainty of the love of the divine and my mom and, the feelings of home when you're in a relationship, maybe that's still okay, right? So it depends. It depends on how deep the pain goes. Also depends on a lot of the circumstances, how many times you've relived that and how many times you've misinterpreted that. So there's not a manual for this. There's a lot of different factors to take a look at, which this is again where medicines come so helpful, because you will find a lot of clarity in the exploration of all of the subconscious map that is uncharted, right? You can find the longitudes, latitudes to be able to understand, okay, and how do you know is what comes first? Which emotion comes first? Which memory comes first? Why memory? Because it's first remember, and then once I have the memory, then I relive it, and then I resolve it. And that could be the opening, that could be like opening up the book for the first time. And then now you got a ton of other things that you have to resolve. So now this is just one way of doing it. It could be that you go to a very core triggering event that as a domino effect, it heals a lot of the other things that could have taken place afterwards.
Right. It's like peeling off the layers of that onion, because a lot of people, I'm depressed. I don't know why. I have anxiety. I don't know why. There's, I think, a reason for that in our Western psychology wants to say, oh, it's a chemical imbalance, take this serotonin drug. And people just think, oh, it's a chemical imbalance, but it's not. It's layers of depth that we're not taught how to unpack and understand.
And I'll put a parenthesis right there. It's actually true. It is a chemical imbalance. It's not one or the other. It's both. Yes, it's a layer of energetic trauma, but for me to stay consistent with that thing that I survived, at the very least, I know that that is something that I have to resolve, and I'll recreate it through manifesting different chaotic relationships, or, I felt safe because at least I know that I can survive that. So then that becomes my baseline. And so to be consistent with that baseline, or to recreate it again, or both, then I will do everything, and the ego will stay consistent by the way you treat your body. So someone that is depressed, it's very likely that they have some chemical imbalance that they are generating through diet, lack of exercise, and things, other things. So it's not just one or the other, because it's a holistic. We have to see it in a holistic perspective, which is body, mind, heart, soul, spirit, purpose. We have to take a look at the whole picture, not just of the body, like science does, not just the spirit, like a lot of like spiritual practices do. It has to be the whole thing. We cannot be in fight with science either. That we don't have to submit to a lot of the limiting diagnosis that they sometimes give, but we can take into account in our favor the things that are observable by it, which are very objective, right? You have cancer, okay, I got cancer. Right? You have diabetes, okay. What's the treatment? I will listen to you, but I don't have to submit to it. Right? Because there's a lot of things that I know that you don't consider and don't approve of, like the spiritual healing aspect of it, the somatic aspect of what cancer is, etc., etc.
Yeah, that's so important, like the holistic, like looking at everything, not just the psychology, not just the chemistry,
yes.
Not just the medicine alone. And
yes.
That's what, like, we've been talking for close to an hour, so I don't know how much more time we have, but...
what time is it?
It's, oh, there's a clock right here.
Oh, it's right there. It's 1 o'clock,
Yeah,
1:15.
So...
We can talk, what other subjects do we have?
Just like the integration real quick, like how to tie this together after medicine, and then I want to hear like what you think the future of psychedelic medicine should be, or there's a lot of different thought schools about the way it should be done, and the way like we should or shouldn't do it, and if it's hopefully halfway to the regulation in the United States. And then if you want after that, you can just tell me about like Pachamama, sacred paths, and like what the ceremonies are like. But yeah, definitely wanted to touch on like the integration and then what you see as the future.
Let's talk about, those two. So when it comes to integration, we gotta keep in mind that the integration is the assimilation, the incorporation of an experience which is outside of your normal day-to-day capacity to experience, right? You come into ayahuasca, you go very deep into an altered state of consciousness where you are able to receive insights, see different things, realize different types of wisdom, right? And all of that is accessible in those altered states of consciousness. When the medicine leaves, you're back to your normal self. And all of that, even though in the moment it might have brought you a little bit of release and might have brought you some freedom, it's a completely necessary process after the medicine is done to integrate all of that freedom in a conscious way, in a sober way. If we cannot be depending on medicine, we cannot be depending on altered states of consciousness for healing, because you're not consistently in an altered state of consciousness. And that's the reality of life, right? You're working, you have family, and there's a groundedness to this experience that we have. And this is where we have to reconcile things, because this is the level where all of the chaos has been created in the first place. the chaos was not created in an altered state of consciousness. I'm not saying that it cannot be, right? There's a lot of, pseudo shamans that end up traumatizing participants inside of medicine, with abuse or neglect or other things, being, negligent or simply not prepared. And so then when you go into the altered state of consciousness just for the purpose of awakening your awareness, your consciousness to what needs to happen, and what needs to happen here and now, because this is where it took place in the first place, right? The chaos, the trauma, whatever needs to be resolved. But now you have an understanding, you have a solution. So then the integration is, I need to find a way to tell every aspect of myself. My conscious mind already knows it, but my subconscious mind and the unconscious aspects also are not in alignment with this new wisdom. How can I tell that part of myself? And the way that we do it in Andean cosmology is through ritual. It's very pragmatic, very practical, just understanding how to speak to the subconscious mind, and this is through ritual, through symbolism. Right? So we use a lot of symbols, a lot of rituals to integrate. When we're not using ritual, then the integration can be very lengthy and it turns conceptual. And it's a risk to that. Conceptualizing wisdom, it's dangerous. Because really what is taking place is you're just feeding the ego a lot of conjecture, truly conjecture, because it's not well grounded in the way you feel and who you are truly. When you integrate it, then there's going to be a shift in the way you feel about life, in the way that you start to perceive things and everything. And I'm not saying that without ritual integration cannot happen, but it is a much longer process, right? And it's not as efficient. So this is one of the things that I really enjoyed. When I was on my incubation period for 3 years, I was doing, psychedelic integration, the whole thing, but things were not feeling like whole yet. And when I started doing the rituals, immediately things started to manifest, sphinxes, transformation, going over challenges. And it's a very, again, pragmatic way of healing the ego so that you can start to have different kinds of baseline, for operation. And so integration is a required aspect for any medicine, even meditation. When you go into a very in-depth meditation, you require integration. When you do 2-3 hours of breath work, like Kriya, right? You're actually entering an altered state of consciousness that then, whatever happened then, you need to integrate it. Right? And you require a little bit of time, dedication, devotion, and commitment to yourself, to your healing process. And it's very, very important. Integration is key. Without integration, there's no healing. Without integration, there's no maturity. There's no maturity of life. There's no spirituality, really. There's just accumulation of experiences and accumulation of conceptualization. People get very eloquent after 5 years of ayahuasca. They speak about the whole thing, but then you see the fruits of what life is bringing to them, and there's some chaos, right? We all go through that. We all go through, because we're all in the same process together. It's not pointing fingers, it's just understanding what are the means for growth and a healthy growth, right? So yeah, does that answer the question?
Yeah, that does. It's like the important thing is practicing what we learned, not just learning it and
living through it.
It's
Yes.
living the lessons.
Yes.
The lesson is, I am so attached to things being a certain way that the practice is now living by that new wisdom.
Commitment is crucial. If we don't
The
commit,
symbols help bring back to that reminder.
yes.
Yeah.
And so it's a commitment. And so, it'll be that you work for a little while and you find this, you commit to the integration process and you do a few rituals and you stay very disciplined with connecting to the vibration of the wisdom that you experience, and then you start to bring it more and more and more, and you start to relate to it a lot better, and you start to experience it a lot more, and then you find it's like I've done it, but you've done a little bit. You've done maybe 1 or 2 aspects of your life, of your subconscious mind, of the different experiences that have created some trauma, you're good at some aspects, but there's so much more. It's an infinite amount of energetic connections, right? And so, yeah, it's like you're saying, living it is very important, very, very, very important.
Yeah, that's why it's like the holistic thing we were talking about. Like it's not just the medicine, not just the therapy, not just the rituals. Everything all together helps us. Like what we're really trying to do is like rewrite those samskars. So I think that's awesome, and that's I think really important for people to know is that it's not just taking the medicine. That's helpful and it's important, but there's work to be done also. And the problem I think in a lot of psychedelic documentaries and psychedelics, they say do the work, but they don't explain what the work is.
And the work has to be tangible, man.
Yes. Talk to somebody knowledgeable about medicine, not just get mushrooms and take them yourself in your room. I mean, that's nothing against that, but there needs to be more than just that. But yeah, since we're at an hour and 6 minutes right now, we got to start cleaning up the place and everything.
We got a little time. You want to talk about the last one?
The last one was what's the future of this? And because what our goal is to have, number one is social acceptance of this. So when people go off and do ayahuasca or mushrooms or bufo or whatever it is, it's not seen as somebody, oh, you're doing drugs. We're trying to raise the awareness that this is a valid path to healing, and it's very helpful. And we don't want a valid path to healing to be illegal. But what's the right way to do it so we're not making too many bureaucratic barriers to it, and we're not getting too far away from the spirit of the medicine? And I think that's a pretty big debate right now in the United States.
Yeah, I in my experience, right, I've gone through, psychedelic assisted therapy and a lot of different, we've worked with a lot of people from different organizations that, they're based off science. And it is very helpful for the movement forward, right? These are the organizations that are doing the groundwork in getting counties to accept the use, right? Not recreationally, right? But the use of psilocybin, like what's happening in Portland, Santa Cruz, San Francisco, different places like this, Berkeley. And so it's all of these legwork is completely necessary. However, I do believe that it must be heavily balanced and complemented with lineage teachings, with ancestral understandings of the purpose of the medicine in the planet. I think that it is being limited by healing, integration, psychedelic experiences, and things like this. But the wisdom that comes from, our lineages, not specifically our lineage, but the lineages of, the jungles, right? Whether it is in Peru, Colombia, Brazil, and the sacredness. There's a sacredness to all of this that we're doing that must be taught. We have to teach the new generations devotion. We have to exemplify devotion for plant medicine work, sacred medicines. These are sacraments. This is divinity. This is sacred. And so this relationship to sacredness, of course, is experienced, but it is not integrated, right? There is a conceptualization of all of it because of the heavy input of science into it. And so, for those organizations that are large organizations doing with great intentions, putting this forward because of the need for healing for the masses, this is, first and foremost, a lot of gratitude to all of them. All of the people doing this type of work is amazing, is great. And the one suggestion and what our vision is that those same efforts can start to be influenced also by, a higher level of understanding that comes from the roots of ancestry. our ancestral teachings. You know, there's no need to reinvent the wheel. Spirituality has always been there, so making it practical, right? All of these teachings of Advaita Vedanta, the Gitas, the Vedas, and then also the teachings of the Kapaknyan, the Popol Vuh, all of this, you know, Christ consciousness teachings, all of these teachings are, they must be integrated into all of the work that is taking place. And it's difficult. I know we understand that it's a challenge because of the separation of religion, you know, the church and the state. And it is not about that. It's not about religion, institutionalized religion, you know, starting to gather power to dictate the ways and the norms. It's not about that. It's just the principles of the purpose of all of this movement that is taking place. What are the principles behind these healing processes? These are what we are doing at our organization. We don't indoctrinate anyone. We just share some principles and people apply them, and there's a natural organic healing. There's a preparation, there's training, there's a lot of different things. But it is based off all of these spiritual teachings, you know, from the Andes, from Hindu, from Christ consciousness. And so we see it, you know, the future that we see is one that will awaken to the understanding of such need, of such requirement, right? Not leaving to the side all of this sacredness and the fundamental processes, right? To be able to relate to such sacredness, to be integrated into everything that is taking place with maps and everybody else, you know. It's you know, that's our vision for the future.
Nice.
It's like a fully integrated.
Yeah. So, we're in Mexico right now, but for Pachamama, does Pachamama Sacred Path, does that fall under the Religious Freedoms Act or anything like that? Or, and I guess you could kind of tell us about Pachamama Sacred Paths.
Yeah.
Shameless plug.
Yeah.
What's special about Pachamama Sacred Paths?
Yes. What we do is out of faith. This is our faith. This is our calling, which is a spiritual calling that we've experienced first and foremost within our own healing. And then for anything to grow, if you want your healing to remain established, right, you must share the healing. For your wisdom, if you want your wisdom to be fully established, you must share it, you must teach it, right? And so we share these teachings. We share them with that purpose of healing. And so this is our heart desire. This is our munai, our, you know, wish, spiritual wish. And we are using our power to manifest this in our organization. And so the organization, you know, offers retreats, but not just the retreats. The retreats is just the experience to ground all of the wisdom, which is the wisdom that I was sharing that we must integrate into the ways forward from science. And so the retreats is a taste of the wisdom. But then all of the work that happens afterwards is, you know, the spiritual work that we do with initiations, with pilgrimages, with different courses, and all of the integration, 40 hours a month that we provide as an organization to every participant to support people's integration processes. We do fall under the RFRA, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, like a ton of other organizations do. And, you know, we do have, you know, in the future also the plans for the exemption as well, you know, following the steps of a few brother organizations, a few other churches that have gone. We are a church and, you know, 501c3 nonprofit. We receive a lot of donations to help people that need, you know, the assistance. Although we understand the value of these transformations that take place, more than anything is we want to make sure that it is accessible, right? Especially if our brothers and sisters are truly hurting, then this is a safe space to come and experience alleviation from that, Right? These are planting seeds, and this is a way that we share, all of the wisdom and knowledge. And this is the way that we do our part, as an organization. We share it through biodanza and sensorum and different kinds of men's retreats, women's retreats, father-mother, also mother-daughters, father-son retreats. There's a lot of different ways that we come into sharing all of the principles of the Andes, Yanantin, Masintin, the teachings of the Nocancani. There's a ton of ways and spaces where you can open up to put into perspective for your own life and your own benefit, what are these teachings about, right? In a pragmatic way, so that you can experience the beautiful teachings of different spiritual lineages.
That's beautiful. It's awesome. Any final words before we close, or anything you want to?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about a lot of different things, and I think the one thing that it is a consistent, message that we practice ourselves and we give to participants that come is practice balance. To practice balance, we must commit to balance. And balance is, you require healing to be balanced, because we're out of balance because of trauma, because of negative things that have happened to us. And so a commitment to balance in the Andes is called Aini Nakuichis. And so we must practice Aini. We must practice this sacred reciprocity with life. And it goes a sacred reciprocity with our medicines from Mother Earth, with Mother Earth herself, with Taita Inti, Nina Taita, Mama Huayra, with all of the elements that we can connect to. We must continue to practice balance, and we must have the courage to heal, and so that we can start to find that balance ourselves. This would be the message for anyone that hears this. Find that courage within you to go heal and find balance in your life. So everything else in your life, in your personal universe, can also start to balance itself.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think it's great for a great first step for people to look in the mirror and ask themselves, why am I the way I am? And go from there and really get in touch with how they feel. And that's basically the first step. So it's awesome.
Uh-huh.
It was awesome talking to you. We talked about a lot of stuff. I think everything we wanted to cover, we talked about.
Nice.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, brother. It was like an hour, right?
Hour and 18 minutes.
I hope it turns out right.
Yeah. Hopefully this helped isolate your voice from the sound of that bell.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it did.
Yeah.